What I want to talk in this session about is this International Library Automation Perceptions Report that I've been doing for a number of years. I don't know how many were in my talk earlier today. So I talked about this kind of triangulation of using multiple methods and tools in order to be able to gauge the impact of the products and the technologies and the vendors on library automation industry. So this is one of those points of triangulation. This is a survey that I've been doing since I think 2007, I think, is when I started that. So the idea is to, let me back up a little bit. There was a time when there was this set of satisfaction surveys that were being published in various ways, and they were based on an N of like 10 or 20 or 30 or pretty small numbers, and they didn't really ring true to me. So I thought, yeah, I think I want to do something like that, but if I'm going to do it, it needs to be of larger scale. So by using the data that I have on Library Technology Guides, the database of libraries, I'm able to kind of converse with thousands of libraries in order to get a higher number of results and have a kind of survey instrument that's kind of consistently structured year by year so that I can get some data over time as well. How many of you have responded to one of my invitations to respond to the automation survey? Okay, it's about half the room, I guess. The other half hasn't, I guess. And it may be somebody else in your library. Let me say a little bit more about it. About my website. It's based on the directory, trying to get more information about the key vendors. So just pass right through those. So 2007 was the year I started doing it, and try to gauge interest in several kinds of issues. How satisfied are you with the functionality of the automation system that you use? How well is its functionality presented for print management resource, electronic management resource? What is level of satisfaction with customer support? And then questions like, well, are you interested in open source or not? Are you considering changing vendors? If you are, which ones are you considering changing to? So all of that in aggregate can be pretty accurate data. So the final point on this slide is that, so this is a report that I published directly through my website. It's not published through ALA or any other organization, though ALA did a library technology reports based on my data once. But these annual reports are essentially published by me. And so, it's a methodology I've been pretty consistent about. I would say it's peer reviewed by all of you because it's all of the formulas and the way that I present the data, though in aggregate, is pretty transparent, I think. And people are always good about helping me find my typos. I make a lot of them. So year by year, I've been shooting for, in the neighborhood of 3,500 to 4,000 responses. Every year that I've been doing it, I open the survey in around November, depending on how busy I am, and then keep it open usually through the first week or two of January. And remember what I said this morning about how do you name these things? So here I'm collecting data that's asking for opinions in a calendar year, in 2018 in this case, though it's being published in 2019, I'm calling it the 2018 report because that is the time frame in which the data were submitted and reflected, even though it's published in the next calendar year. I probably made the wrong decision, but I've got to be consistent now that I've started it. So it also has and we'll look at it in a minute, a field in which you can add narrative comments. And so the thing is that if you're just okay with your system, you're going to click through kind of the radio buttons that I give you to numerically respond to the questions. But if you're either really happy or really unhappy, you're probably going to take the time to say something about that product or the vendor. So it makes for interesting reading. It's, the people are just delighted that the system works as well as it does. That occasionally happens. Or, they want to go on about, some issue or problem. Also keep in mind that there's always something wrong. And the thing that's wrong now is the greasy wheel that they want to talk about. So again, you have to take everything about this with a grain of salt when it comes to individual responses and kind of look at the responses as a whole per category as you look at it. I always worry that folks are going to kind of take it as a more precise set of results than it really is. This is a lot of individuals working in libraries that are giving their opinion about the system that they're using. So it's subjective in a way, but I think that if you aggregate it enough, it tends to be a little bit more truly reflective of how these systems are performing in the market. And that's kind of what I'm going after. So any one person being either highly positive or highly negative is going to kind of be canceled out by the kind of weight of overall responses. And once you have enough responses, I think that's true. With a small number of responses, it's easily skewed. So there are rules about how I do the survey. I want the person responding to the survey to respond institutionally and not personally. That's a lot to ask because it's hard to kind of step back enough to really think, well, what does my institution as a whole think about this system? Because that really is rarely the case. I know that any institution that I've had anything to do with, there are probably 100 different opinions from different folks that work in different parts of the library regarding, the quality of any given part of the system. But nonetheless, that's kind of what I'm asking folks to do. So I only allow one response per library, and I only allow one person to respond one time. So the business logic that I wrote behind the survey will check and see, it's tied to a record in my libraries.org database. So that's kind of one of the tricky parts, is that there's got to be a record there for that library. But in most cases there are. Occasionally in the course of conducting the survey, somebody will write me an email and say, I couldn't find my library. And either I help them find it or create a record for them. And that's good for me too, because that helped me identify a library. And when the survey is done, I'll know about what automation system they're using. So it helps me improve my data. So only one response per record in my database. There are lots of multi-branch systems, so there are multiple records in the database for a given library organization, which means that it's okay if I get a response both from a central library and responses from individual branch or division libraries. In fact, I kind of like that because I want not just the folks that are administering the system, I want folks that are using the system. So chances are someone who's working in the branch library is more in the user category, and the systems librarian that responded from the central library, which is typically the case, sometimes it's a director, is thinking kind of more, how the system has been to administer and how the vendor relations have been more directly. And then I also check to see that the email address is unique. So one person only gets one vote ever. So if you're thinking, well, I work for a consortia and I want to answer for all the libraries in my consortia, you can't do that. So you can ask the folks in those libraries to respond, but you can't. So again, I'm just trying to form a balance to make sure that I'm getting lots of different opinions and no one's opinion is weighted more than any other in the overall response set. Tying it to the libraries.org record kind of helps me a lot and helps the strength of the survey. I could make the survey so that, yeah, you need to tell me, where your library is, what the population is, how many records you have, and all those details. But I've already got all that information. All I need to do is match it to the record that I have in libraries.org, and I have a lot of demographic information that I can automatically populate into the survey results. So that, I think, is kind of, I'm able to leverage the infrastructure that I have in my website to be able to say a lot more things about the library and kind of categorizing results. This is what I just already said, that institutional perspective. Everybody has their personal opinion, and I hope that folks can think broader than that and kind of give the institutional response. The response is anonymous. So when someone responds, they're responding with personal information, their name and their email account, which I'm the only one who sees. So any way that I summarize the result of it is entirely anonymized, so that from the aggregate results that I present, you cannot know what any one individual or organization, how they responded, including the comments. So the comments are a little tricky in that, someone will mention the name of their library in the comments. They mention the name of their, somebody in their organization, things like that. So what I do is that when, there's a field for the kind of raw response that came from the user, and then there's another field where I kind of have a redacted copy of that. So I'll cut and paste the response into it, and then I redact it using kind of a standard set of conventions to remove any information that was revealing about the organization or the person responding. So you'll see like a bracket, ... bracket, which means that I remove something. So, but other than that, I really try to be true to the response that someone entered. So that's kind of the balance that I've found between in order to be able to preserve anonymity. So these are the categories of questions that I ask. I mentioned most of them. The one that I didn't mention was loyalty to the company. I kind of like this question. How likely are you to buy your next system from the vendor you're working with now? So, that tells me a lot about, kind of how, are they happy enough with this vendor that even if they were to replace this current system from their vendor, they'd buy another one from that same vendor? Because especially in the realm of kind of next generation versus legacy systems, it kind of measures how likely the incumbent vendor is to kind of keep their legacy customers through the new system, or whether they're going to jump ship and look for someone else. So if you ever need some interesting nighttime reading, you can read through the comments of the survey. They're polarized. This slide kind of shows the number of responses I've gotten per year, and it's varied. Mostly, the first year I offered it, it looks like I got 1,700 responses, so good first year effort. And it's kind of gotten better. I think I peaked in 2016, with a little bit over 4,000. And I think people kind of get fatigue of surveys, so they don't respond every year. So I got a little bit less this year, but still well within the number that I think it takes for the survey to work. And then what I think is more interesting is that I've got 34,000 kind of aggregate data points across the years of the survey. So this is this year. So what are this graph kind of shows the types of library that are responding. You can see it's mostly public and academic, but schools and lots of others as well. And again, this is following the library type designations that are given in libraries.org. I call it an international survey. It's heavily weighted toward the English-speaking world. Even though I do a lot to try to draw in those from other countries and that work in other languages, I really haven't found the magic to do that yet. The survey, through help of colleagues, is translated into Spanish, German, Chinese, Finnish. Just based on what folks are able to have volunteered to do for me. So it's helpful, but still I really haven't found a way to get a lot of libraries in these non-English speaking countries to respond, but I get a little bit. So that is useful information. I just wish there was a lot more. Just to give you an idea of what the survey looks like, for those of you who haven't done it directly, it's pretty plain and simple. You just click through radio buttons that respond to the questions, and I try to give pretty specific instructions about what I'm asking for in each question. Followed here, and then as you see, some free text fields for some of the responses. So there's the narrative response that you see at the bottom. But I also ask, well, so if you're considering changing systems, what are you considering changing to? And deliberately, I don't give them much help. This is kind of, most folks who respond to the survey know the systems that they're thinking about. And I don't want to give them a list to pick from, so they'll be picking things that maybe they're just, that looks like a good system or something. I want them to actually kind of type in the names of the systems that they're thinking about, and then after the fact, I go through and normalize them. It's kind of, I noticed that people call their systems by different things. Like, they'll say, okay, what system are you using? Oh, I'm using Circe. Well, Circe really hasn't existed as a company for a long time. Do you mean Symphony or Horizon? Those are the systems they sell. They also sell EOS.web. So, as hard as I try, it's hard to get the library community to be consistent and correct about what to call the systems that they run. So as often as not, they will call a product by the vendor name, which is fine when the vendor only has one, but it's ambiguous when they have other ones. Or is it WorldShare Management Services or WMS? Is it EBSCO Discovery Service or EDS? So I try to normalize all of that, so then when I run my scripts to kind of process that information, it's all kind of showing up in the right way. I need an authority librarian. Oh, I'm married to one. Okay. So again, this is just to show you what the text looks like. If you brought your binoculars, you can read it. You can look on the website to be able to see it as well. So these are the languages that I offer it in, and this year I've only published it in English. The last couple of years, folks have translated it into Spanish for me, and still may. I just haven't gotten that back yet. But I think people appreciate seeing it in their own languages. I care about the size of the library responding. I track that information simply because it's a big deal when it comes to how libraries use and evaluate their systems. Big libraries exercise the functionality of their system to a much larger degree than smaller libraries, and it's a dramatic difference on the survey results. Like the first year, I did it. I kind of lumped all of the results together, and it was these small vendors that got the highest scores, and that just didn't ring true because they're serving a much different, more finite set of needs than the systems that are serving kind of very large academic or municipal libraries. So lesson learned from that is that from then on, I've really worked hard to contain the results within particular categories of library type and library size, because it's only then when you start getting results that ring true. So these are the basic statistics. I'm not a a very sophisticated statistician, took a few statistics classes in graduate school and so forth, but these are pretty basic. Just response distribution, mode, mean, median, those kind of simple calculations that have kind of worked really well, I think, as being indicators for measuring the results. The mean, by far, is the one that I use most in describing it. So then once I have the data, and across years, you can start doing visualizations like this that show the performance of a given system over time and all the different question categories year by year. So is this vendor getting better? Is it getting worse? And it kind of tells a story. This one is seriously Dynix, I think. This is Koa, where they, in its earlier days, as it was implemented in the libraries and more broadly, it kind of started off at a certain point, but you see kind of consistent improvement in the functionality of the system and the service that's being provided since. So here's another one. This one's Symphony, where you see kind of an initial fall and then steady rise after that. Anyone want to posit a guess for the early lower scores?
Interesting things that you have done numbers in 17 and 18. It comes to call it now in a symphony. The numbers which you put at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the numbers are so much different. Because for call was 100.
Yeah.
Now here we're talking about not that much 50.
Okay, so.
This is interesting.
Yeah. So the bottom row shows the year, and then under that are the number of responses that year.
And then it's interesting that it's such a big response in 17 you had 364, in 18 you have 254.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, yeah. So how. There were fewer libraries using Koa that year that responded, but there are not fewer Koa libraries. And the same thing with Symphony is that the customer base is close to the same. How many was I able to draw into the survey? And then this one shows, well, what systems are folks saying that they're thinking of changing systems? And again, there's some interesting and then non-intuitive trends here. So it's interesting. Did you bring your binoculars? Can you see the small print? Sorry about that. So the ones on the bottom are things like Alma, Apollo, kind of are the two that have the lowest indicator that the libraries are thinking of changing. And then in the middle are ones like, I think, Polaris and some like that. There are some that have this ever-rising curve of, more and more, a larger and larger percentage of the libraries every year are saying, I'm going to change. Well, those are systems like Voyager and Aleph, where, it's a legacy system. There's something to move to. They're an academic library. It's ready. These systems are kind of primed to be left by academic libraries. And then the one that's going down, interestingly, is seriously Dynix Horizon. There's you can kind of piece that together. So at one time, seriously Dynix was saying, if you're on Horizon, you need to move off. But then because not that many of them moved off to Symphony, they said, no, we're going to support it as well as Symphony for the duration. So this kind of says that the customer base is okay with that. They're offering kind of the services layer that connects it to Blue Cloud and all of that. So, they're mostly kind of doing their development on Blue Cloud, and they're saying we can do that just as well on Horizon to Symphony, and it looks like that message has been successful with their customers. So again, the segmentation results is really critical. So in all parts of the report that I publish, I highly emphasize those segmented results as opposed to letting them fall together. And here are just a couple of different tabulations of this size and type combination: large public libraries, large academic libraries, and so forth. Is the survey having an impact? I hope so. I get, the number of downloads of the report on my website is really high. And, I see vendors reference the results when it looks good for them and their promotional materials. I see libraries ask a vendor, when they respond to an RFP, can you give us your results for such and such from this survey? So, I'm both pleased and worried that it gets used in those different ways, because, I'm more than anybody aware of the foibles of these kinds of surveys and want this just to be kind of one small factor in the consideration and not to overly color the way that libraries, think about vendors when they go out to look for a new one. I hope it's more in the category of let's help shape the questions they ask, not that it posits conclusions to those questions for a given library. So I'm going to plan to keep doing it. All of you will respond next year. Raise your hand. Yes, I will. So I hope that it continues to be a successful and interesting report. So that said, I think I'm doing okay on time. I'm happy to kind of talk about individual results. We can look at the different graphs that are available. I'm happy to show those to you. And I'm also happy to field really any other question. In this morning's talk, I didn't really have that much time for questions. So, anything about a product or a vendor is kind of fair game. First, let me show you how to get to it. You go to librarytechnology.org, go to Documents, Perception Survey, and then you can get to any of them but the current one. And that's what I recommend, because each current survey takes into consideration and gives you access to the data of all the previous ones. So I've even thought about kind of unlinking all of the older ones, but they're all there and it's useful. So the usual introduction, kind of the summary of notable observations, and then you can kind of go directly to the results of any given library type. So somebody pick one. Stephen.
So what I think is an interesting question is trends in migrations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I'm seeing in your data specialization by certain vendors to certain niches within libraries.
Right.
So Polaris, more public libraries, Ex Libris, more academic. Are you seeing
Yes, absolutely. So
greater market focus, or are they start, like for years they were trying to do all markets at once?
No, the ones that are successful are the ones that are specialized. And I talked some about that in my talk this morning, that Ex Libris, is really focused entirely on the academic and research market and has a compelling product in that space. OCLC positions World Share Management Services only to academic libraries. So again, that's kind of a secondary competitor there. Follett, exclusively for schools, Lucidia, exclusively for specials, and it leaves, so library.solution, anything from TLC is public, Axial public, and so forth. And it's really only Innovative and Circe Dynix that are the ones that try to sell the same system to multiple types of libraries. And boy, that's a tough situation to be in, because it's hard to compete when you have kind of a general system against kind of a much more advanced system developed specifically for research libraries. So the migration trend has been that Ex Libris and OCLC are picking off the academic customers quite a bit of Circe Dynix and Innovative, and even like Library.Solution is used in some smaller academics. So those are kind of easy prey to a specialist system. So
quick secondary, are you seeing any trend towards consortial purchasing? So the Wyoming model or the Alberta model, where colleges, universities, and public libraries and schools tend to be on the same system?
Yeah, so not quite that way. So the pattern is that single type consortia are a major trend. When you look at the community colleges of California that signed for Ex Libris, the state university system in California, the Pascal consortia of all the academic libraries in South Carolina, all of the University of Hawaii system, one big consortia after another has kind of fallen, that sounds negative, to Ex Libris Alma because it's really specialized for being able to do that. Shared infrastructure across large numbers of organizations in a way, that's kind of their sweet spot. And economically, it's a very profitable spot because the financial value of the contracts is really quite high. What is not happening are multi-type consortia. Those are kind of reorganizing in a way. I think it was North Dakota? Yeah, North Dakota previously had OD, Online Dakota Information Network, that was a multi-type one. So the publics went on their own and the academics ended up choosing Alma. So more and more it's the case that there's not a good fit for the software that's optimized for a public library versus what works well in an academic library. So multi-type is a really tough build these days, but there are a lot of those. More public and schools together. I see more of that persisting than academic and public and schools.
Now, I'm mostly interested in government libraries. What would you talk? What would you say? What systems are more occurring on the government side? And the second question would be, what would you think about Circe Dynix getting FedRAMP and that they will be able to overcome the basic thing what I am facing, the cloud computing is built.
Yeah, well, okay, so the question was, how are any of these systems doing in regard to government libraries, and do you mean US government libraries, and then about FedRAMP. So FedRAMP is increasingly a requirement. You know more about that than me, and there aren't very many automation systems that are certified in the FedRAMP marketplace. And to date, there are 2 that are in process, none that are complete, and the 2 that are in process are Ex Libris Alma and Circe Dynix EOS.web. So that's how it is. And if you have a system that's not on FedRAMP, then your eligibility to be acquired by a U.S. government library is severely impacted. So,
Properly, Circe Dynix has the FedRAMP or not?
both are in process.
Yes, that's what I.
Yeah, but both.
1 year ago.
Yeah, I hear they're close. So I don't know. I mean, so I think that they're strongly motivated to get that compliance.
I heard that the Navy was a supporter, and then they back off, and they asked me if the Army could.
Yeah.
And I had no.
Yeah, so I don't know about the insides of those processes very well, not being, kind of in the government document.
Because I cannot go for open access. I cannot go
Yeah.
for any repositories, system. You cannot stop.
Circe Dynix always met the criteria, but this is new criteria for the longer
Yeah.
thing. So Circe Dynix has always been the FBI, CIA,
Yeah.
all the military that has end-to-end encryption and no other system.
Right. And also the deal is that Circe Dynix had this stylus version of Unicorn for a long time that was able to deal with classified information. That's not the system even under consideration for FedRAMP. You know, they're positioning EOS as that. Here shows the results relative. Are you thinking of changing systems? Yes. What systems are you considering? So I'm looking at the question here of legacy systems versus, you know, what they say they're likely to consider. And this is somewhat based on name recognition as much as anything. But so if you say, okay, I'm running Olive, the majority, you know, are of the ones that said they'll name a system said, yeah, we're thinking about Alma. So far so good for Ex Libris.
When you highlight it, it just goes.
Oh yeah, okay, let's not do that. If I let go of the cable, will it keep showing? And if I try to make it a little bit bigger, will it? Okay. So 33 is more than any other system mentioned, so far so good. You look at Voyager, 40 is way bigger than any other system mentioned. So it looks like Ex Libris is fairly good as far as their existing customers being favorable. You know, at least Alma is on the list. They may have listed other systems, but Alma is on the list. You look at Millennium, another legacy system. Innovative would hope that Sierra would be the highest one mentioned. Well, they came in second. You know, Moore said that, yeah, we're interested in Alma. Same thing with Sierra. Because we're seeing some turnover there, I thought I'd list that in the left-hand category. And libraries running Sierra, 21.4% are saying they're thinking of changing. That's not a great number for a currently supported ILS. And then pretty large numbers are saying they're considering either Alma or Folio. Circe Dynix, Horizon, doing pretty well. 4 say they'll go to Symphony, but more are saying that they would go to Alma. So, you know, is this a good predictor? Hard to say, but I've looked at earlier survey years relative to today, and it rings pretty true. You know, the migration patterns that were indicated, you know, 2 and 3 and 4 years ago, you know, those libraries are now running the systems that they said that they would. So fairly accurate predictor. I think I need to do more statistical analysis to actually incorporate that in the report. But I'm seeing, you know, at least episodically, you know, good predictability here. Okay, so there's that I think is interesting. You know, we looked at the one where we're talking about interest in changing systems and a lot of data behind that. What I want to do now is show you, okay, we've been kind of talking, how many here from academic libraries? Public? Okay, look at public first. Well, let's look at big publics. So selected statistical tables, I'll go to large public libraries. And the thing that is that you'll see different systems in these tables because you have to get enough responses to show up in the table. I think the threshold is 11 or 12. I forget what I set the threshold at, so that we don't get kind of this long tail of responses where there's only 1 or 2. So you can see this year that Polaris was the best one, you know, in this initial category, general ILS. You can click on this link to get to the multi-year version of that question, where you can see that, is it showing the highlights? You know, that here, you know, Polaris, you know, is doing well. It's the highest one, but it's certainly gone down in the last 8 years considerably. Sierra has gone up and down, but consistently you see a precipitous drop, and you can speculate about what happened that year, kind of started to rise, really rose, and then dropped back down. So you see it's been more or less flat since 2014, more or less after the company changed ownership. You can see that Horizon has done better every year. Symphony has more or less done better every year. Not real evenly, but generally upward climb. So I think that's good and that's interesting. Then let's look at print resources. Again, Polaris is doing well. Symphony is doing well year by year. Again, you see slightly different patterns when you start asking about, print versus electronic. Generally, I noticed, and I'm not quite sure why, all of the libraries said their ILSs aren't doing as well for print this year. Go to electronic. Oops, I lost my place. So let me go back. So go back to the top, get to my table of contents, click on large public libraries, and this time I want to show the results for electronic resources, which I think is the sore spot for integrated library systems that really don't have advanced electronic resource management. Yeah, just 5 more minutes. 1 minute?
We're at 5:14.
Okay, so I could keep showing you all of this, but this is all available. I'm just looking at my website. So in the last minute, do you have a question about this or something else you want me to address? Don't everybody raise your hands at once. Yes?
Have you seen any more migration to open source systems?
So the question is, have I seen more migration to open source systems? I would say more is the hard part of it. There has been a continual adoption of open source systems by public and academic libraries in the US. The adoption has been gradual, not spiky, so it's been a little bit more every year, but it's a routine part of the industry. 14% of public libraries in the US are using an open source system, COA and Evergreen, and 5 or 6% of academic libraries are using an open source system. So we'll see how that mix changes over time. And then when you look outside the US, the numbers are drastically different. Latin America and India, COA is the dominant system. So there would be maybe 80 or 90% of libraries that have an automation system in India are using COA. The others are using libsys or another kind of local ILS there. So those patterns of open source vary dramatically country by country. With that, I think Stephen's going to make me stop talking.